The East Baton Rouge Parish Library believes that a thriving business community is good for us all. That's why we help entrepreneurs start businesses with tools like Gale Business Builder. Keep commerce rolling by providing access to computers, printers, and free Wi-Fi at 14 branch locations. Get a library card. Grow your business at ebrpl.com/business.
Started making beer at home and immediately fell in love with it. After just like the day of my first batch of brewing, I was already thinking, can I do this for a living?
Oh yeah, obsessed with it. He was totally consumed by it, and then looked at me one day and told me I was put on this earth to brew beer. And I was like, wow, that is such a bold statement. And if you can say that about anything, then you need to follow your dream and do it.
Good morning and welcome to Strictly Business. I'm your host, J.R. Ball. This is a webcast featuring conversations with Louisiana's most inspiring and influential CEOs and entrepreneurs with the goal of providing insights, ideas, and inspiration to help you and your business grow. We want to keep Strictly Business as interactive as possible, so for those joining us live, here's an icebreaker question for you. Submit your vote in the comments, and the results will be posted at the end of the webcast. Strictly Business is brought to you by the East Baton Rouge Parish Library and Home Bank. Without their support, this project would not be possible. Joining us for this edition is Chuck Spicer, president of Our Lady of the Lake Health and the Baton Rouge market leader for the Franciscan Missionaries of Our Lady Health System. With some 30 years of experience in healthcare management, not only will we learn about Spicer's plans for Our Lady of the Lake, but also his keys to management success, as well as tips you might incorporate into your leadership portfolio. Chuck, welcome and thank you for joining us today. Roughly 5 months into your new position, what have you and your leadership team identified as key objectives for Our Lady of the Lake in the immediate future?
Well, thanks for having me on, JR. It's been a wonderful entry into the community, into the state. I've really spent the first 100 days, learning. It was really hard walking in the door new for the first time in 17 years and realizing how much I didn't know. So I had to gain a lot of the history of how we got to where we're at, both as a community and as a health system. And then once we entered that 90-day timeline, 100-day timeline, we entered the beginning of the year. And we started some strategic planning and really focusing on what do we focus on? We know children's is going to be a big focus with some new arrangements we have with Children's New Orleans. We can talk about that later. On the adult side, how do we really grow things that have been really strong in the past? How do we really shore up things that have been a little bit weaker? I know for sure we'll have a considerable focus on cardiovascular. That's been probably a strength that we don't talk enough about as a community, about the great physicians and surgeons we have at the Heart and Vascular Institute here at the Lake. Cancer is another one. We've had a lot of changes with cancer in the community. It's still a very important part of what we do. We have some surgical specialists and medical oncology specialists that do some things that no one else does in the state. So how do we grow that? How do we grow our ambulatory footprint, access points around the community, including primary care? And then we have some really strong partnerships with orthopedic surgeons and neurosurgeons in the community that I think that private physician health system versus just employing every doctor is a big part of what we're going to do in the future as well.
Okay. And while this market may be less fragmented than some others in which you've served in management roles, the competition here does seem every bit as intense, particularly in a couple of the sectors you mentioned, pediatrics and cancer care. In this kind of environment, what can the Lake do to distinguish itself from the other major players in the market?
I think one of the things we're going to do really is focus on a statewide, initiative. How do we find partners throughout the state? Louisiana is not a big state, just like the state I came from, Oklahoma. To do it all on our own and service New Orleans and Shreveport and Lafayette and Monroe is going to be hard. How do we do that with partners? We're working with LCMC in New Orleans around children's. That's been a great relationship so far. We started at January 1. We think it could be scalable. It could apply to other services as well. Cancer is another one with LSU. We think cancer tying it to research and academic growth is really key. And that distinguishes our impact versus a community hospital, because we're not just delivering a certain care provided in a hospital, we're delivering a continuum of care, but also doing it in a way that potentially brings research and solutions to the table. Last week, I was with one of our surgeons, and they're working on a device that will help see that a site that the tumor has been removed from is tumor-free, is cancer-free. Right now, that's a pretty exhaustive effort to take sections from that tumor site and analyze them. If we can get this device to work, it could change cancer care in the entire country and the world.
Well, and as we turn our attention to partnerships, prior to your arrival, there had been a long-time partnership between the Lake and Mary Bird Perkins, and I know that sort of terminated well before you got here. But I was thinking, in a world where partnerships are a bigger part of the healthcare sector, what is it like trying to manage the unwinding of a partnership?
Well, I wasn't here when that was unwound. I know that it was, it was done, and we put everything back together. It was probably incredibly difficult to do that, both from Mary Bird's perspective and ours. I think when we put partnerships together, we spent a lot of time with Children's New Orleans we thought about what happens if this doesn't work. We want it to work, but how do we make sure if it doesn't work, we both get out in a way that protects the patients and the people we're trying to help. And I think partnerships have to be managed daily. It can't be managed through a contract. It has to be a process and communication that constantly manages a partnership, so we don't get in a place where we hurt the community at large.
And as you had mentioned, with the vision of expanding sort of the footprint of the lake, and you're getting into rural areas, and the focus though on specific areas like the Children's Hospital and cancer care that you had mentioned, it would seem like strategic alliances with other healthcare partners are a key component to that. Why are these partnerships so important, and what advantages in a broad perspective do they bring?
Well, fragmentation, as you said in an earlier question, is the enemy of the future of healthcare. We need to have more standardization of care, easier ability to migrate a patient from rural Louisiana into Baton Rouge if they need a higher level of care. A lot of that's going to be around the electronic health record. How do we get our electronic health record available for people throughout the state? And it's not as easy as just saying we want it to be available. We have to develop relationships. We're committed to working with smaller hospitals across the state to have that continuity put in place. It's not there now. We're also committed to continuing outreach clinics we've done in cardiovascular and pediatrics to get this in places where people don't have to come all the way here. And then we'll rely heavily on virtual care, which we've done in the pandemic. And that was really something that was gated too heavily. In the pandemic release, there's a lot more comfort level with virtual care, which we can use to hit people that are 2.5 hours away, may have a hard time getting into the city.
Yeah, I know early on, some of the issues that had revolved around partnerships dealt with the HIPAA issue. Do you feel like at this stage everybody sort of managed how to negotiate the restrictions or the regulations that are tied to HIPAA?
Well, I think the government's also realized that not that HIPAA is unimportant, but we have to understand that collaboration is critical. I don't think the way HIPAA is designed currently is going to be an impediment. I think we figured out how to navigate that system. I do think there's other advantages to collaboration and partnerships. It duplicates unnecessary investments or reduces duplication of a case in point. If we can work with Children's New Orleans to recruit one doctor to provide some specialized care versus both of us trying to recruit the same doctor, it's better for everybody.
Yeah. Well, and let's get specifics about the potential for the lake that you see relating to two key partnerships: the deal in place with LSU, and then secondly, the tie-in with Pennington Biomedical on the Metamor Institute.
We were actively working to optimize both. I was at LSU yesterday. We'll be at Pennington today, talking about really the same strategic reset. It's much newer with LSU because we're just a year into that partnership. I think the discussion with LSU is how do we marry their research interests to our clinical growth plan? So cardiovascular is a good example. As we look at growing an already very big and prominent cardiovascular program, how do they look at adding research scientists or research material around that service line as well, so we can work on it together? With Pennington, it's similar. And with Metamore, it's about really the holistic health. And then we can do everything from nutritional counseling and with Pennington and Metamore to bariatric surgery. And bariatric surgery can free someone of diabetes, which can reduce costs, reduce incidence of cancer and cardiovascular care. So really, we were limited on how we could expand Metamore because of the pandemic, because so much of that relies on people coming to us to really entrust their life and having a lifestyle change with Metamore. I think we're able to rethink that and restart that now after we're coming out of COVID a little bit. And we've got some real talented people with both LSU and Pennington to work with.
And I don't think any sector, changing gears a little bit, was more disrupted by the pandemic than healthcare. What lessons did you learn from the pandemic, and how are those shaping your management and operations going forward?
You know, you learned a tendency to be incredibly reactive because things were changing so quick. Sometimes you reacted too quickly. So if there's a new term we could coin, it's deliberate reactivity. How do you maintain some level of deliberation before you make a major reaction that turns into an overreaction? I think that's when things are moving so fast like they were in the pandemic, you had a tendency just to try to react quickly. And sometimes that led to a mistake. A second part of that is you have to own the mistake. I mean, we are going to make mistakes as we run through a very complicated business time. You have to have the ability to unwind the mistake quickly, and that's through transparency, collaboration. But the pandemic taught me a lot of lessons. It also taught me the value of interpersonal relationships that aren't through Zoom. And I remember walking to my office and there was nobody there. Everybody was home, and you lost that connection to build culture, to have informal meetings, and I'm excited we can regain that. I think culture is hard to build in a virtual workplace.
And I think also the pandemic exacerbated a problem that certainly those in healthcare were already well aware of, and that was challenges on the labor front. And this is something, and again, healthcare got hit particularly hard on this, but there are numerous sectors in the business world that are facing labor challenges. From the healthcare perspective, what are you guys doing at the Lake to try to sort of deal with the healthcare labor challenges that you guys are facing? I know nursing is a big one, for example.
Well, our relationships with FranU, which is our university, on developing a pipeline of workers. How do we use something like that with other training organizations around the city and state to work on a pipeline? That's a slow process. So the other thing is, how do we bring technology and other parts of the workforce into the hospital that maybe weren't there in the past? Well, hospitals got away from using LPNs, a lower level licensed nurse, years ago. And I think there's a skill set there that brings to the bedside that's really critical that can help a nurse provide normal care. Technology is really critical. We have so much more technology available at the bedside, whether it's monitoring or other tools, that we've got to make sure our nurses and our techs have as many tools as possible.
Well, speaking of technology, there has been a lot of recent discussion about artificial intelligence, particularly in light of the ChatGPT. What is your view on AI's potential in the healthcare field, as well as some concerns you think need to be addressed before whatever maximum potential it has can be realized?
Well, there's so many things going on with AI. The thing I've been learning the most about recently is ambient listening tools, where there's ambient listening tools in the exam room to pick up on conversations, not just the doctor dictating, but what a patient or a family member might say. And that can help the provision of care, but it can also create some potential of how do you manage all those conversations, because you can't control what a caregiver might say in the room. It may or may not be accretive to treating that patient. So it's a great tool in technology, but it also brings complications we have never foreseen before. And you mentioned HIPAA. How do you manage to navigate the regulations as you bring on new technology as well? We've also been slow to relax regulations. There may be technology that accomplishes something we don't need a regulation for anymore. Patient restraint's a good example. How do we use monitors for patients' restraints that makes that less of a regulatory burden on hospitals? So, the term singularity, which I think we always thought that meant we all became robots. No, it really is. We'll have so much technology that will dictate how we make decisions and drive our lives, it will be close to electronic thinking. And, really that artificial intelligence thinking that can bring power and wonder to the bedside and to the patient care experience. But I think it also can be very complicated. It also can be very expensive. What I worry about is investing in technology A, and technology A getting replaced by technology B, and having to go back and reinvest in technology B, or have technology A bought by technology B, and my prices go up. So it's just a new economic challenge that we'll have to navigate through, but also opportunity.
Yeah, and I would suspect that again, not a healthcare person in any way, shape, or form, but I would think at the end of the day, that human touch and that hands-on doctor, nurse, whomever is always going to remain critical. Regardless of what goes on in the technology or knowledge-based front.
I think healthcare is still an intuitive and relational business, even though it's scientific. And I don't think you're going to replace a physician or nurse's intuition through AI for a while, or surgical skills obviously rely on the hands of our surgeons. So there's going to be some things that stay the same. It's how do we weave in technology to make the care process better and cheaper?
And going up more to the 50,000 foot view, how would you describe your management style? And are there any adjustments that you make depending on if you're leading a for-profit facility, an academic one, a nonprofit organization, or a mission-based healthcare provider?
Yeah, I think I learned early on, I had some really good mentors, that you got to be who you are. And you may adapt certain skill sets to the environment you're in, but your style really can't change. You are who you are, and you evolve over time. But I whether it's good or bad, I've got to focus on being Chuck. If I try to be Tim, I'm not going to be as successful. I think what I've done over the past, I've been very lucky to be in a lot of different types of environments. There's way much more that's the same that is different. But I'm able to speak some of those languages in academics or in for-profit or in a community-based environment that hopefully makes me a better partner, so I can work with those organizations now at the lake. Another part of it is, for us being faith-based, there's a part of my leadership style that's actually been unlocked. And that's not having to worry about sharing my faith and the healing power of Jesus Christ, which is critical to us at the lake. And so that's actually been freeing of my style. But other than that, I've got to be the best possible Chuck. My wife will tell you, there is a bad Chuck out there. You don't want that guy. You want the good one.
Yeah, I think there's a bad side to all of us. But, well, when you talk about that faith, when you think about like a deal with LSU, that balancing act between, there's no doubt the Lake is a faith-based organization. And yet when you get into, let's just say, student health care at LSU's center, how do you manage that when you're talking about a faith-based organization being involved with a public entity?
I think you go into the partnership that's eyes wide open on that issue. And there are certain things that we will not be able to do as a part of our Catholic and faith-based ministry with LSU. That's been well understood. I think a lot of that's because LSU's been in a very Catholic South Louisiana for a long time. So we all know separation exists at a certain level. We respect that. We certainly respect that everybody that comes to us for care, we see in the image of Christ and provide that care. But then there's still some things that aren't available through our mission and ministry. But we understand people have ways to go get those things as well.
Sure. And as healthcare has evolved, just like everything in the business world has evolved over the last 30 years, are there any specific areas where, as a leader or manager, you've sort of had to adapt to sort of deal with changes, whether it be in the workforce or just the way, the world sort of views certain aspects of the business world?
I think you have to be prudent in using data. There's so much more data available for my daily business calendar and meetings I go to than there were 30 years ago. It's unbelievable. So you have to be careful because it's so available not to get lost in the data. What are the data sets and points that are most important for us delivering great care, and focusing on those? Because if you can get lost in a Tableau system and just be doing data analysis all day long that doesn't actually benefit anyone. So I think it's having to deal with the vast amount of data we have available to us every day to make good decisions.
Yeah. And I would think, enacting change in any organization is always sort of an interesting challenge. And I would think it's even more so in an organization that has been a major player in its market for scores of decades, but is also coming off an extended run of being led by a core management team that had been in place for years. So if you could talk about, sort of what it is like trying to steer the ship in a slightly different direction, or even a more dramatically different direction, and how you sort of implement that and get buy-in across your workforce.
Well, the first thing I've tried to do in here and we when I came into other organizations is you respect the past and the heritage that's been there. I mean, there are a lot of that is very good. Certainly some things that people can be more critical of, but there's a lot of good things that I will and will continue to respect. I've had the ability here to have some people that have moved on and got promoted. So it gives me some chances to bring some new folks in. And I think that allows us to blend the perspective from the outside industry with the context of what's happened in Baton Rouge in the Lake of the last decades. And that blend of context and perspective, people that have been here a while, people that are brand new, I think is going to be very powerful. I never want to be an organization where we've all been there for the last 30 years and we were a little bit tired and stayed and maybe lack that perspective. At the same time, I don't want to be one where we're all brand new and don't have any context. So I think we have a chance to really blend something special here at the Lake.
Whether it's a healthcare organization or any other type of business, what would you sort of point to as being the top key to being a successful leader?
For me, it's I think it's very important to be transparent and as you communicate with the people you work with. I am not a great poker player anyway, and so I think transparency is the way I lead. Have people understand what I'm thinking, where we're headed, what my take is on something. To me, that's just a cultural element I think is very important going forward. The other thing as a leader is develop a good cultural radar system and become an organizational sociologist to understand what makes up your organization. I think culture is kind of an aspirational term. People have a culture they want to have in place. They may not get there every day, but they ought to have some aspirational cultural goal. We're developing that at the Lake. It's something we'll aspire to do. A lot of that's been in place and dictated by the sisters that came over here. This is our 100th year. They first came to Alexandria, then to Monroe, and then Baton Rouge. And how do we maintain that cultural beginning into what we do over the next 100 years?
And again, from a business perspective, whether it's internal or external, how do you deal with criticism?
I take it. I mean, I learn from it. I don't act like it's not there. I mean, I'm transparent. I want people to be transparent with me. If I've done something that's a problem, let's get out on the table. It's not going to mean it's going to be a fight. It'll mean that I don't have to repeat a mistake, or I can explain to you why I did it. But I enjoy constructive criticism. Enjoy, maybe not the right word. I appreciate constructive criticism. You never like to hear you've done something that makes someone feel in a bad way, or you've done something that people view as a mistake, but you need to know it. And I never duck it.
So I'm wondering, what advice might you have for any C-level executive arriving from the outside to manage or lead a well-established or mature organization? So, at the end, just thoughts for, when you come into a new organization as a leader, what advice would you give that individual?
Well, I was very deliberate when I got here. And some of that was because I realized that's the only way I was going to learn. I couldn't know everything day one. And there's a lean term that I think happened in the Toyota plants back in the 80s, and it's called big ears, small mouth. You listen and process before you really start saying much. And you've probably picked up on the fact that's not always easy for me. I'm a communicative guy, but I've also found how me being patient that first 100 days and doing a lot of listening and learning brought back some intellectual curiosity about my business that I don't want to lose again. It's been kind of fun to be vulnerable enough to not know anything and be curious. And sometimes you're at someplace so long, you don't want to ask that question because you should know the answer. But I think probably it stymies some curiosity that is helpful to us as we expand and evolve in our careers and our jobs.
Do you consider yourself a type A personality?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and the reason I ask that is, is a type A personality, and then how do you sort of convince yourself or sort of remind yourself to not jump in there and to embrace the concept of big ears, small mouth? Because as someone who borders on type A myself, the easiest thing is to sort of jump in there, big mouth, small ears. So what are your tricks to do it the right way?
I think type A, it's probably a whole podcast we could do on what is type A.
Yeah.
Kind of like the same thing as what is an alpha. I think it goes back. People like telling you about their perspective, and it helps you learn about, even if it's not 100% correct, it helps you learn about them, about the organization, and develop a relationship. I think I'm better than saying I'm a type A person. I'm a heavy relational person. I think it probably took the pandemic to have me really figure that out. But the way my day was built wasn't really through the meetings I had. It was through the end and the beginning of meetings where I'd have small relational conversations with people that actually helped me do business, or dinner meetings or whatever it might be. And when, in a week, back in March of 2020, that all went away. Going to get a cup of coffee and, meeting somebody at the coffee pot and then talking about, hey, we got that report, or, hey, this is what I found out about this doctor. Those conversations went away. And so I think that relational capability has to be unlocked in all of us. It has to be, back to what I said earlier, you got to be who you are. For me, that's who I am. I'm a relational guy. And I think that's how I learn, and it's how I tick.
Well, and of course, as someone who came from the outside of Louisiana, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, what's been your experience adjusting to Louisiana cuisine?
Well, you have one of those expandable belts. No, it's been, I'll jokingly say that the cuisine has been great. It's almost like God led us right to this house where we bought because it's close to restaurants that we like. And we can drive, 3 minutes in almost any direction and hit a place that we love. I will tell you, we undersell ourselves in Baton Rouge about how great of a place this is to live and to work. We have really smart people at the lake. You have really good places to eat. You've got affordable real estate based on what else is happening across the country. You got people complain about the weather all the time, and they haven't been through a winter in Oklahoma City or a summer in Oklahoma City because they both stink. So I think the cuisine has been great, and the community's been even better.
Well, Chuck, thank you. I really appreciate you giving us some time to share your insights and your expertise.
Well, next time, let's do it in person. Thank you very much for your time.
And thanks also to our viewers for making the time to join us today, as well as our sponsors, the East Baton Rouge Parish Library and Home Bank. Please join us May 17th for the next edition of Strictly Business. Until then, enjoy and make the day a great one.